You're listening to EdTech Heroes, a podcast that looks at how teachers in today's classrooms can use technology to improve student learning. In each episode, a hero in the world of education will share their story and discuss how innovation can influence the minds of the next generation. Let's jump in.
Hey y'all, and welcome to EdTech Heroes. I am your host, Nef, and today's guest is Mandy Adams. Mandy is a teacher and technology integration specialist at Franklin Public Schools in Franklin, Wisconsin, where she has been since 2016. Mandy is also a Google certified educator as well as a blended learning certified teacher. Mandy, welcome to EdTech Heroes.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. What is the weather like in Franklin, Wisconsin? Are you guys still frozen over?
Not really. So we did have our whole state basically closed last week, Tuesday, for an ice day because it was like full covered in ice. But today I think is around 25, 28. Kind of like, we take our jackets off in this weather in this type of town. So.
Shorts, flip-flops, you guys are ready to go to the beach.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then I'm going to ask you my other Wisconsin question. Do you like cheese?
So I do. I'm originally not from Wisconsin. I'd never had a cheese curd until I went to college. And then I was like, okay, well, what are we missing out? Like, we're missing out on everything. So I have become a cheese girl, but I definitely was not one originally.
All right. Boxes are checked. It is incredibly cold, or at least it was incredibly cold last week, and you like cheese curds. So this is the perfect representation of Wisconsin. Now that we have the important stuff out of the way, let's talk a little bit about Franklin Public Schools. So y'all have 8 schools, about 4,700 students, and y'all are using Screencastify a lot. Like, you created 35,000 videos in 2019. And this past year, like 300 teachers created at least 25 videos. Those numbers are bananas. What is the secret for getting so many teachers willing to use video?
Yeah, I think a big part of it has been getting teachers to feel comfortable with what video can do. So obviously COVID opened a door for us, opened up this idea that video can play into the classroom. And what does that mean? And how do we meet those equity gaps? It's one of our biggest goals in Franklin is closing equity gaps, or not equity gaps, closing gaps in keeping with the idea of equity. And so when we look at that, video can open up some of those doors and start to bring teachers and students together in new ways. And so a lot of it has been looking at tutorials, 5-minute videos of, hey, I need some support on this, or a student is struggling because they missed class because they got quarantined or whatnot. Now they can go with that. So it's been kind of really cool to see that happen.
Tell me more about this intersection between equity and video. How does teachers creating video actually create more equitable classrooms?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest pieces why I love videos in classrooms is because let's say a student's out for whatever reason. It could be they're going to a college visit. It could be they're sick for whatever the thing might be, or they're on a field trip. By creating a video of whatever it is you're talking about, maybe it's just your directions, just here's how we're getting started today. A student who's missed class can go back and watch that and know what they missed on. It's not just here's a Google Doc with some bullet points and I don't know where they're elaborating. It's they're hearing their teacher's tone. They're hearing where there's emphasis on certain words and what that looks like. And so now we have students who maybe were missing class before, maybe they're still missing physically, but they're able to make up faster.
Very cool. I love that idea of recording directions. And I feel like it is a sleeper. It is so much more important than folks might give it credit for, because I think about the student that is absent, but I also think about the student who is present in the back of the classroom and unwilling to raise their hand to ask questions. And they have access to that video and the ability to be able to pause and repeat and really, really understand and delve into what the classroom is understanding and going through.
Absolutely. If you think about it from, let's say I'm starting a project, and maybe it's a 4-day project, a 3-day project. If I do like a little snippet video of here's the overall directions, or here is this video that talks through the first part of the project, and I link those into my directions, let's say this kid ends up getting to day 2 and is like, what did they say? How do I get there? They now can go back and listen to the exact thing that I told them the day before. It's there for them. Now let's get to day 4, and one student is already at the end and they're ready to go to submit. They don't have to come up and ask me as I'm working one-on-one with a student who maybe missed 2 days. They're able to keep moving forward and not getting stopped in their education.
Yeah, certainly. I love this idea of video being able to open up this avenue for self-paced learning so that students can work as slow as they want and be able to revisit those videos 1,000 times if they need to. But then you also got that kid who is on day 4 when the class is still on day 1 and they are able to move ahead seamlessly. I think the other really cool thing about what you're saying is how video is able to divorce the teacher from being this repetitive parrot, right? Like you don't have to worry about saying the directions over and over again. So you get to have deeper conversations with students and go into their interests and their real problems with this particular assignment.
Absolutely. It's what opens up this door of students really owning what they do. So great. They're going to walk out of my classroom at the end of the year and they're not going to remember things from September because we don't think through that way. But if there's a way that we can connect them to engage in the work, can engage into those skills of owning their learning and knowing how that when I get done with this part, what am I going to do next? And they can keep moving forward. That's a skill they're going to take with them from class to class if they decide to go to college, or if they're going to go into a different venue and they're going to go into the workforce right away. That's a skill they need in either area. So it really opens up doors to every student.
Absolutely, absolutely. To be able to understand how things are working sequentially, to be able to understand where they can go next, and also how they might be able to access that information. If we think about it in terms of the workforce, you don't want to go to your boss every single time you have a question. You're like, let me Google this first. Let me see what resources are actually available to me. And then if I exhaust all of those things, here's what I've already done to attempt to solve my problem. Now, can you help me? Versus this idea of students being beholden to get any piece of information.
Absolutely. And I think that's where I was in one of our tech ed classrooms today. And I was like, ladies and gentlemen, take your tech ed classes. I was like, because those are skills that you're not going to like just pick up on your own. But in reality, with videos, you can.
I would love to learn a little bit more. I started to integrate video when you were in the classroom and how your use of video has evolved now that you are helping your fellow educators.
Yeah, absolutely. So ironically, I remember being in college and taking the educational technology course that they were forcing everybody to take. And we had to make a screencast, like a 3-minute screencast. And I absolutely hated it. And in my reflection, I remember writing, I will never make a screencast again in my life. This was horrible because I had this big fear of it needing to be perfect. And that is a big topic that with video, I think is something teachers have to be okay with, is not being perfect. But so when I started teaching, it was like, I'm not going to make my own. I'll find other videos already created. And that was really where I got started, was finding resources to offset different areas we were looking at. So if we were talking about US history and we were looking at the American Revolution, what's another way of students can learn that information rather than me just giving them a straight lecture that I lose half of them because they're like, what am I doing? What you're talking? So it's finding those resources. And so then we kind of got to this point of there's a lot of resources out there, but they don't necessarily fit what I want to get them to. Maybe I'll try my own. And it took me forever to get started. Like making content in the beginning is so difficult because I would get stressed out about the littlest thing. I would make a mistake. Oh, start all the way over. And I would do that over and over and over and over again. And I was like, what am I doing? And that, I think when it really hit biggest for me that video could be used and how to put that in the classroom from the tech integration side of my job was when COVID hit. That really opened a door of our students were at home and we didn't have live lessons going on. And so it became this, teachers, you're going to have to create your lessons somehow. how you do that. Let's talk through good use of that. And so that opened this door to continually keep doing video and finding ways that video can enhance what they're already doing in class, but maybe also extend it past that.
This journey feels so familiar to me. And when I talk to teachers all the time, a lot of the fear around video is exactly what you articulated all the way back in college. How am I going to be able to make this perfect? Especially when we're inundated with videos. We see these content creators on TikTok and YouTube and all of these places who have spectacular videos. And we're thinking that that is the bar that we have to hit. But in reality, I think that you picked out something that is incredibly important. We have a relationship with our students and we know how they best learn. So the ability of us to be able to put that into a video is enough, regardless of whether there's a little bit of a goof in the way that we say something or if our background isn't quite right. We don't want to start over. In fact, sometimes that even endears us further to the students that are going to be watching this video. The other thing that I think is so, so cool about what you said is that video became this necessity when your district went remote. And I think lots of districts are in that exact same place. However, they may now be thinking, okay, we're back in person. We can completely throw away that video and move on with things that we did prior to COVID-19. I know that that is not the mindset in Franklin. So how are you all thinking about incorporating some of these best practices into a world post remote learning?
Yeah, we're really diving into that right now, because I think for the first time we're starting to talk about what does learning look like post COVID. Like, COVID's gonna end. We're like looking at that, which is super exciting to talk about. And a lot of it comes down to that idea of what is best for the student and how do we hit every student. Not every student is going to be successful from a lecture type style classroom. Not every student is going to be successful having an online learning environment. We learned that. We know that. We have evidence to back that up from when COVID hit. So how do we kind of create this atmosphere that hits as many students as possible in what they're going to do well in? And so I think that's where it comes in, of different instructional strategies and different pieces of how do you instructionally do something to not only it's not content based, it's skill based. How do we get them to know the skill and transfer those skills from one class to the next class to the next class to life after high school? And that's, I think, the biggest piece of for Franklin is we're currently looking at is what do we want to continue? So after the first remote learning, we asked teachers, what did you find during this time period that was really successful? What were things that weren't successful? And so then last year we took what they said and we used that and created a kind of process in place, because we didn't have anything at that point. So we created a process of teachers are going to do this and teachers are going to do this. And that worked really well. And throughout the year, we'd progress monitor with them of, all right, how did this go? What worked? What didn't work? What do you need more support with? To this school year of the same thing. Looking back at what we've done, this has been great for just everybody. We're going to keep doing this, or this didn't go so well. How can we tweak that? And that's where I think videos play such a huge part into as we move forward, is that equity piece. Every student will have the ability to continue moving forward in their education, no matter what's pulling them out, no matter if it's a health reason or a personal reason, or just they missed a day for a mental health day. We have those, right? I mean, we all need some of those times where we're sitting in class, we're sitting in a meeting and we're like, I know I should be listening to what they're saying, but I just can't do it. Now students, if they have those moments, they're not going to get far and far behind. They're able to pick right back up once they're mentally able to do so.
Certainly. And it sounds like everything that y'all are doing at Franklin County is centered around the student, which is exactly how we want to think about education. The other interesting thing about how y'all are using video is that it's not all teacher created video. Your students are also creating videos. Can you talk about that journey? How did you all go about introducing video to students, and how are you using it throughout the district?
Yeah, absolutely. So ironically, we were asking students to make videos way before teachers were starting to make them, which I think is super weird to think. Like, we were saying students, this is a great way of doing this, and we were having them do it, but we weren't necessarily doing it ourselves yet. So we have students making podcasts. And that's actually their assignment. They're working at a group and they're making a podcast and thinking about what questions would you ask and how do we lead this forward, and showing their knowledge that way. Students are doing student discussions. So some of those discussions may be across courses. So they've got students are in our first hour and our third hour, and they can still work together. So you're opening up those doors if you have kids in different hours. We've got students who are doing justifications. So great, a student completed a project and they followed all your directions of checked everything off. I put pictures, I put some text, it's got citations. Awesome. Well, no, now you can have them actually justify their project, their reasoning, like their presentation of it. You can have them do that through video, and you have that now. Now they can see it, and you're verbally hearing them actually explain what they learned rather than just saying, here's a trait, here's a fact, here's something I got off Google and I paraphrased into my own words.
Certainly. I love it. So I'm going to have to politely request that you don't send this podcast to your students. I don't know if I'm ready for their critique since they have been podcasting and doing it for years.
We've got, even our middle school has a full podcast project.
Really? That is awesome in terms of like 10 to 12-year-olds creating podcasts.
Yeah, it's kind of cool to see how it all plays in. Those podcasts in general, really, the teacher's done a really great job of incorporating some community members too in those. We, throughout our whole district, from elementary, middle school, and high school, to have different ways that we are utilizing community members. So at our high school level, we will do mock interviews from our business classes and in our seminar classes. And so they actually set up a live interview with somebody from a job they potentially would want to go to in the future. And they do an interview, and the student person conducts and then gives them feedback of how they did in that interview questions and how could they improve as they're doing it. So we've got the high school really focusing in those career and college type ready skills. You've got middle school, elementary doing those podcast projects where they're reaching out to different community members and pulling those in. And then you also get down to our elementary level where I was just with a teacher the other day who was making a video of her students playing their recorders and playing their music and playing their instruments and music. And she wanted this video to be able to send out to the parents and send out to some of our key, like our school board members and things like that, to show what they've been doing and how far they've come. And so I think it is a hard piece with community of how much do you open up? But I think our Franklin teachers have done a really nice job of being really transparent with what they're doing and showcasing that and using technology to give parents, school board, all of those type of people, all of our admin, the ability to see that on a day-to-day basis.
The idea of the recorder being recorded is pretty cool. I always think back to interfacing a little bit with my nieces and nephews when I'm visiting. And like any good adult, I ask them how school was, and I get one-word answers and no real idea about what they actually did. But when I get a video or get to peek at an actual assignment, that becomes the only rich representation I have of what they've done. And being able to send that on to a parent is invaluable. And then also thinking about having community members be a part of that is incredible, to really see everything that the school is able to do and some of the spectacular work that students are doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I think the cool part about it is with video in any aspect, it can be sometimes then also used as an example for future years to come. So we had created this idea a couple years ago now of having so what used to happen was each of our activities at the high school would all come together in like a hallway, and kids could walk through like, which activity do I want to join? And they would see each part of it and kind of walk through it. And people don't go to it. There's so many activities, like how do you know where to go to? And so we came up with this idea where each club could kind of make a 30-second video of why should you join their club. And now any kid not being fearful of being seen can listen to every single club's video of why should I join, what's your favorite part being here at home and in their study hall, wherever they are. and make those decisions to join and get more information. So it really opens doors for students, parents, community, building admin, other teachers to know what's going on in your building and around the district.
I love that. I used to teach eighth grade, and I remember toward the end of the year, we would physically walk this over from the middle school to the high school that was across the street. And in the gym, there were hundreds of clubs that they could potentially join. And they had to kind of make a decision right there in that moment about what they were going to be interested in 3 months from then when school actually started. Not only was it overwhelming, but I think that you also bring up something important in terms of peer pressure, right? If I want to go join Dungeons and Dragons, but my peers are saying that that's not the coolest club, I might be unable to actually go in and get more information. But turning this into video and this asynchronous experience really allows students to be able to explore lots and lots of clubs without fear of judgment. And they also don't have those time constraints. I know for us, we were there for an hour and you had to see what you wanted to within that hour. But having a folder of lots of videos gives you perhaps the entire summer to be able to peruse and understand what might work best for you.
Yeah, and it opens up even going beyond that. It then also becomes a representation to maybe students who are brand new to a district, transfer in at semester, transfer in at quarter, and are feeling lost. And where do I go? And I'm interested in dance. Is there anything about that? And you can go and see everything that's an option. You may actually now see something you didn't even know existed before because it was on a document that was 100 different lists long. Kind of opens up that door for that to be kind of seen for every student.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even think about that, to be honest, in terms of what students are not included even in the fair, right? And maybe come to school bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and have no real representation of what's available in that particular place. If we get a little bit back to classroom use, can you tell us a little bit about why a teacher would go through the extra trouble of watching all of those videos or listening to all of those podcasts, right? Because I think the pushback that we often hear, and you might hear as well, is that it takes too much time to be able to watch all of these videos. How do you respond to that when a teacher might surface that to you?
Yeah, and I think that's a huge thing because teachers are putting in their whole life into their classrooms and into their students. Even now, like I still will say, like my kids, like meaning my students, but I still call them my kids. We invest everything we have into them. And so time is such a key factor in what teachers do and trying to like efficiently do things. And I think what opens the door is your feedback leading up to that final project. So if you've just given a kid a project and they're working and then they just turn the final project in, yeah, you're going to have to fully listen to every single moment because you have no idea how they got to where they did or what that looks like. But in my mind, as you're going through them, if I'm sitting with each group throughout that project and hearing, okay, go through this part with me, talk me through this, talk me through what this looks like. Well, now I kind of have an idea of where they're at. I'm giving them formative feedback along the way. So when they get to that ending assessment, they've already kind of gotten that feedback. The goal, yes, they've taken it. Doesn't mean they always take it. We know that. But the goal that they've heard it once, they've heard those like corrections, they've heard those critiques, but now they complete the project. Great. They checked off all the boxes. They added everything they're supposed to have. It's under the time limit. They turned it in. All right, then what? Like, why did I have them do it? Well, if the goal is to actually have them learn something, I can go back through them. And if you have more than one kid through, you still may be talking about 20, 30 minutes of video. If all I'm looking at now is that video rather than going through their script and I'm going through who did what in each part, if I'm going just through that piece of it, you've taken out half the work because you've been doing it all along. So I think it's really difficult for teachers because they're seeing all of it at once. I'm looking at their script at the end. I'm looking at their podcast at the end. I'm looking at their reflections at the end. That is a lot to do. Absolutely. a better way of doing that is do it throughout the project. Do little checks of, hey, let me see your introduction up to this point. Let me see your ending through here. And now you're critiquing them all the way through. By the time they get to the end, you already have run through all of it. You're really only at the reflection piece, which is one of the biggest pieces probably is just their actual justification of their learning and their understanding of what they did.
Mandy, we have asked a question similar to that to probably 2 or 3 different guests thus far, and we've gotten a lot of different answers. But I have to say, this idea of formative feedback freeing you up is a new one for the podcast and something that I think is incredibly interesting. How do we create these checkpoints so that at the very end of a project, students have had most of the light bulb moments? And as educators, we already have a decent amount of evidence of student learning, which really that's why we do this, right? Like that's why we have students complete work, why we have them complete assignments. We want to get evidence around what they know and what they don't know. So I absolutely love that. And I have to say, when I was a teacher, I can think back to having students create an essay, right? And the kids are creating the essay. And in my first year, I'm reading a book, I'm not even engaged. And then at the end, I'm like, oh, I have 150 essays to grade. Woe is me. But if we go back and reshape that, and I'm walking around and reading the essays in the moment, when I finally get to that stack of 150 pages, I really have an idea of what Ebbison has already written. I know what Lori is doing, and I'm zooming through those papers in a way that I am unable to if I've been disengaged from the process up until that point.
Absolutely. That's what I love about using technology in the classroom is how can it actually enhance where we're at? So we did it was an essay, it was a DBQ in a history class. And so it was document-based questions. The students got a question they had to answer using a bunch of documents we gave them. And so we're going through it. And throughout that process, there were checkpoints for me. So I put into place, okay, when you get to this point, you have all of those documents analyzed, you have to meet with me. We're going to confer on what you're doing and we're going to talk about it. And maybe that's a small group of anybody ready at that time, or maybe it's a one-on-one conversation because you just really got it and you sped through it, or you needed a little bit longer. And so we kind of go through that and like, okay, I know they understand what this article is about. Yep, you're good. Go ahead and move on. Keep going. All right, now you're at your writing process. Well, you've got a video that's going to walk you through how to write an introduction. Because while they're already at that point, I may still be with Johnny over here talking about article document number 2. We're talking about this paragraph and I need them to Layla to continue. So Layla's able to keep going on. She watches the introduction video, starts writing it, now has peer feedback of that. Maybe that is through video. Maybe she's actually having to record herself reading her paragraph. So she writes it, records it, has to listen to it back, give yourself, now, oh, I hear change. I hear issues. Let me fix it. Next checkpoint, I check off, yep, you've got everything you need. You're here. You're really showing this. You know what? You've missed that main idea. What is the goal of what you're writing? All of a sudden, this becomes a process rather than here's just an end goal, which is really what we want students doing, right? We're looking at their growth. We're looking at their journey in education, the journey in those skills, and not just, great, you've completed a project, you can graduate.
Yeah, absolutely. I am amazed at the way that you all are thinking about video to effectively shepherd students in terms of their own learning and to really get to these deeper insights. So, y'all are clearly innovating on the student side. I want to hear a little bit more about the teacher side of things. With so many videos created amongst so many different creators within the district, what are some of the coolest ways that you've heard that teachers are using video in the classroom?
So we have about a little over 100 teachers at the high school, and that's where my focus really is 9-12. And so some of those are, we just did a PD day that was teachers that we can make videos for. And so I ran a full session on feedback and how do you give feedback to kids. And so some of them are using video to give feedback. So instead of me reading that essay and I'm typing feedback in the comment, or I'm printing every essay out and handwriting on there, whatnot, they can make a video of that feedback and send it right back to them. So they're making videos in that way. They're using videos, again, those direction pieces. So here's my directions of my assignment. It's a full document, has step 1, step 2, step 3, our key essential questions. There's now a video of teachers explaining through that and walking through those different pieces and where are things to really be thinking through. In some of our art rooms, it's been really interesting to watch how video plays into art, because art, you're thinking hands off, take technology almost completely out of it, like our drawing and painting classes, our ceramics classes. But those teachers have actually gone through and made videos of different skills. So like, here's a video of how to do this type of skill and then put that into place. Or here's how you could do this. And now that's there and they have it. And if it's a student who's joining them virtually for that day because they are sick or just making up time or have to come after school, or they have a sub's in place, and I still want my class to continue on. And so I'm going to make a video that they're going to walk through to give them the directions. So I'm physically not in the building, but they're physically still seeing my face to give them their starting welcoming question, their starting activities, doing my closer. They're using those in that way. So there's so many directives that teachers are using it that is mind-boggling, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. When I hear that art example, it feels to me not that different from you watching a video to be able to figure out how to actually fix your dishwasher, right? It's like you are watching something, and then based off of the instruction that you've been given, you're able to complete this hands-on exercise, like throwing a bowl in a ceramics class.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think it is so cool to think about how we might be able to give students access to teachers in times where that is normally not a thing. So a teacher is absent, or my mind even goes to being able to watch a video at home where the school day has ended, but now you continue to have access to that teacher in terms of understanding concepts, understanding the directions, and everything in between.
Absolutely. It really makes us as teachers more of a part of a classroom and more part of that relationship with students, rather than it being, I'm the teacher, I have the power, sit down and listen to me, which is a really daunting thing for a lot of kids, especially when they're just trying to figure out who they are. There's a power struggle at times. And so when you kind of can break it down to where it's not me against you, it's me working with you and we're supporting each other, it opens that door for the relationship to keep moving forward and keep progressing forward.
Yeah, I love that idea of video and the social location of a teacher having this profound impact on the relationships that they are able to build with students. I think that's a really, really profound insight, which is not surprising because I feel like you have been dropping gold since this session has started. But before we wrap up our discussion, we do have a segment here where we ask every single one of our educators to share some tips for teachers. I know that this idea of equity is top of mind for you personally and top of mind for the district. Can you share a bit of advice for our equity-minded listeners in terms of how they might be able to allow all students to access curriculum?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece, I'm going to go back to something I said earlier, is you don't have to be perfect. Nothing in this world is perfect. And so as a creator of video, as someone who's asking your students to make video, we learn through our mistakes. And I think it's so important for teachers to realize that and take that stress and that pressure off of them of the video has, my child made a noise while I was recording the video at home on my own time. Like that happens, right? I remember when I had this day when COVID hit and I was teaching from home, and I have 3 little kids, and my 1-year-old at the time was just not having life unless she was in my hands. And I was recording this video ahead of time for my students to continue learning. And she at one point just went, "Hi." And I looked at her and I was like, I don't have another time to re-record this. So it's going to go be in there. And it opened this door for students to be like, "Hi, we want to say hi to your daughter." So it made it more real to my kids. And so I think the biggest thing and the biggest tip I'm going to give teachers is don't try to be perfect. Your kids will relate to you more when they see those imperfections, when they see that it's okay to make the mistake. Because if they see you trying to be perfect, that's what they're assuming you're needing in return. And that's not going to be attainable for kids.
Absolutely. And when I think about it through an equity lens, if perfection is the only thing that is rewarded, then we always are going to preference some kids over others, right? So if we think about a kid who might have multiple siblings and they're all doing their homework in the exact same place, they might have interruptions in their video. And by modeling that that's okay, we say, okay, kid, you don't have to worry about that. What I really care about is your ability to understand and demonstrate that you know this concept, not necessarily your environment in whatever way that might look or show up in the work that you create. I really like that, a little bit off the beaten path in terms of how our strive for perfection might affect equity. But when you say it, it makes so much sense.
Well, and it just opens up equity within teachers too.
What do you mean by that in terms of it opening up equity amongst teachers for us not to strive for perfection?
Yeah. So if you're not spending 5 hours to create your 5-minute video for directions or for that content, you've now saved that time. So instead of a teacher, this teacher who's leaving at 3 o'clock because they're using video and they are able to leave at the end of the day, or this teacher who's staying till 8 o'clock because they're trying to re-record and re-record and re-record, keep those errors in it. Now all of a sudden, maybe that 5 hours is down to an hour to get your whole lesson done. Now you've given that time back, and mentally that time, as we talked about earlier, is such a key component to teachers' lives right now, of having that balance of mentally in a really good place and physically in a really good place to be for their students. So it not only is just the equity within students, but equity within teachers to open up that pressure of being perfect.
Yeah, we often don't have that conversation about equity amongst teachers, but I even think about the difference between you and I. You're saying that you have 3 kids at home. I don't have any kids. So if it takes us a long time to be able to create those videos, the impact that that has on my life when I'm not worried about child rearing is a lot different than you having to spend the same amount of time but also worrying about these other responsibilities that you might have, right? All right, our final question. Usually, typically, we ask our guests to share their favorite online resources, but you are not a typical guest. And I want to ask you about your newly launched podcast that is called EdTech Back to the Basics. Can you tell me a little bit about your new podcast and what you're hoping that listeners take away from it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been about 3 years where I've been like, I want to do that. I follow all of these other people who have podcasts and it really was, it was Twitter and it was Instagram and it was Facebook. And I'm following all these people. And I'm like, I love talking about what I do. I love talking about instructional technology because what it does when done correctly is it opens so many ideas to teachers. Like, oh, I can do that at the same time and not take any more work out of my day. Yeah. So I love talking about it. And it kind of got to a point of I was looking for a hobby, is what it really started with. My husband was like, just do it. Start it. You can do that. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll start in the spring. And then I was like, oh, I'll start planning. And I started planning and I was like, okay, I'm just going to record just this first part. And then that turned into the next one and the next one. And all of a sudden I was like, I have a full episode done. And it's not great. It's not perfect at all. It did take me a while just to get used to it. But the goal of it really is just to talk about best use of instructional technology and talk about the misconceptions of how technology can play in the classrooms. I think the biggest thing I hear from parents and students and teachers and outside people is kids are on their screens too much. Well, yeah, I would agree to that, because we're not necessarily using technology for a purpose yet. So once we get to that purpose of why are we using it, now that opens doors. So I think that's really where the direction of what I always talk about is bringing it back down to why are we using it? What is the goal that you're doing that's going to really extend, expand, enhance what you're already asking of students? And so the first one was really just on the idea of what is too much and how do you go further. But the next one I'm super pumped about. I'm going to struggle. It's all in blended learning, and it's my favorite topic to talk about of all time. So I'm like, don't be like 50 minutes long, 2 hours long, like condense it down, because teachers don't have all the time in the world. So how can I like make it to the point, but still like love every moment that I'm talking about?
I love it. I can't wait to check it out. And shout out to your husband for encouraging you and getting that podcast out there. Mandy, I so appreciate you joining EdTech Heroes. And listeners, be sure to follow Mandy on Twitter. She is at MSAdams620, and subscribe to her podcast, EdTech Back to the Basics. I am your host, Nef Dukes, and I'm really looking forward to seeing y'all next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of EdTech Heroes, presented by Screencastify.